If you're a new player to Final Fantasy XIV, I want to share some wisdom that I've accrued over the past 1,000 hours playing this amazing game. And if you're contemplating whether or not trying Final Fantasy XIV, hopefully this video will nudge you into taking the plunge into one of the most amazing MMO stories I've ever experienced. Now granted, I've made a ton of mistakes and learned things the hard way during my initial phase with this game, also known as A Realm Reborn, which is why today I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 things I wish I knew as a new player. Welcome back to the channel, my nerds. Let's get into it. Number 10 on my list is this is not a traditional Final Fantasy game. This tip will largely depend if you grew up playing the other Final Fantasy games, which I've learned the habits I've acquired through these titles are hard to break. Initially, when playing Final Fantasy XIV, I assumed the most proficient way to level your character in the game was to spend hours killing random mobs in the wild like you would in most RPGs. So for the very first 3 days of my paid subscription, I did nothing but kill mobs outside of Gridania. At first, I didn't see the error in my ways, as the XP at level 1 seemed like this was a good strategy, but getting to level 15 purely through mobs was horrendous, which is when I learned that literally just playing the story was all I really needed outside of my job quests and the occasional hunting logs. Looking back, this behavior is comical since it's how I often play the other Final Fantasy titles, but seeing how this is my very first MMO, I have nothing but pity for myself. The other Final Fantasy habit I had to break was buying potions, which I literally spent all of my gil in the early levels buying potions. And why? Well, because that's what I learned to do after years of playing Final Fantasy games, and since I wasn't playing as a healer, I didn't want to be without healing powers. I literally had potions in my hotbar just in case I was getting close to death. Again, once I got to level 15, I never used a potion again. Rest in peace to my Sprout wallet, but don't worry, I earned it back in Balmung. Which, speaking of Balmung, my next tip is to avoid it. Or don't. I mean, your first trip to these godforsaken lands will never be forgotten, but then again, user experience is subjective, right? I mean, my first trip to the Shadowlands was weird. I read things in the chat box that I can never unsee. I also saw things there that still pop up in my thoughts at midnight. And most regrettably, I did things there that I can never undo, which is how I earned back all the wasted gil I spent buying potions. Let's just say it involved a bun boy, me wearing emperor clothes, and dancing to a bard playing the Mario theme as people threw gil at me as I danced. Do I regret this? Well, let's just say I can now afford a small house. Anyways, moving on. My next tip for new players is server choice matters. And as a new player, I was oblivious to knowing how servers even worked, probably because I never played an MMO before. And when I signed up for the game, I was told that new players who started in Oceania would receive added benefits to help bring more traffic to that server. I had also read that North American servers were congested and housing was more difficult. Again, a new player who had no idea what any of that meant, but hey, why not try out Oceania, even though I live in North America? But what could be the harm? Well, little did I know that server choice was pivotal in my Final Fantasy XIV experience and would likely be your pivotal experience as well. I loaded up into Oceania and began my grand adventure. Things are quite different over there now that I've tried out multiple servers. Seeing another player in Limsa was a treat. Many days I would spend time in Limsa literally alone under the tree. Queue times were insanely long, but again, I had no idea what normal was. My only experience of Final Fantasy XIV was that it was largely unpopulated, often lonely, and queue times were at minimum 30 minutes for even normal MSQ dungeons, if not longer. Eventually, I did transfer to an NA server, and my god, what a difference. I remember the very first time that I experienced a 3-minute queue. I about choked in astonishment. Not to mention, Limsa is now often where I lose frames due to player volume. All this being said, that as a new player, it's really important to research a server before committing to one. The difference in culture alone is shocking. In Oceania, anytime you run into a character, it's immediate emotes and sometimes even a message. However, in North American servers, you're just a face among a wave of catgirls. So, as a new player, it's very important for you to figure out what server you want to call home. Next tip I have for new players is Your race and character design are super important. Now this one might be a bit niche and some may disagree, but I found my obsessive tendencies for perfection to rob me during cutscenes due to my inability to find just the right look for my character. Now when I play RPGs, I like to feel as immersed as possible, so choosing the player customization options that most align to my real world appearances is typically what I go for. Well, I went out on a limb this time and I should have just followed my gut instinct, but I had to be edgy, so I chose a male Aura with the palest white skin imaginable. Now in the player menu I thought I looked so cool, but once I loaded into the game I looked like a Walmart Kisame from Naruto. I ultimately had to scrap him and start all over altogether, which is when I chose to be a Hyor, the human male equivalent in the game, which definitely felt more immersive. However, given how important glam and looks are in this game, the real end game, I admittedly spent real world money just buying Fantasia over and over to literally just change minute things like eye colors. So yeah, the obsession doesn't stop even when you do have the perfect character and race setup. And again, as a new player, it's best not to spend real world money, so make sure you pick exactly what you want before loading into the game. Now my next tip for new players is storage management, which I am still figuring out the best way to manage all my gear, loot, and other random stuff, but at least for now I have found a temporary solution for my hoarding tendencies. Early game, I just kept everything in my inventory, but after leveling 5 jobs to 50, you quickly realize this ain't Skyrim, and you just can't keep everything with you. And when I say everything, I mean everything. I randomly got into carpentry and made a crap ton of logs and just kept all of these random materials with me. If I could redo the game, I would be much more organized with my items, and once gear was out leveled, I would store it away in the inn or with a retainer. Or if it's gear you truly will never use again, sell it. I felt so weird about selling my stuff, but eventually it came down to either selling it or not being able to get new loot. So my new rule is, if you like how something looks and there's a chance you will use it for glam, save it. Otherwise, part ways. My next tip, again, is pretty comical, especially if you've come from a Final Fantasy background. But my next tip is exploration is not required. And I say this with a caveat because maybe exploration will become important in Endwalker. I don't know, I'm not there yet, but up until Heavensward, I've yet to find real incentive to explore the world like you would other Final Fantasy titles. Now call me a noob, I deserve it for this one. I thought perhaps there might be hidden chests with potions. Again, with the potions, I know. I thought maybe they'd be hiding in little nooks and crannies, but that just isn't the case. I also thought that maybe if I extensively explored the different cities, I would find secret items, but again, that isn't the case. Exploration isn't a real priority, and anything that is quote-unquote important to the story will be baked into the MSQ or other quest givers. Now this may seem obvious to others, but I was unaware and once again found myself aimlessly spending time searching for treasure that was never there to begin with. It's okay, we can laugh about it together. Now moving on to my next tip for new players, an FC can make or break your experience. Now if you're new to the game and not sure what that is, an FC is like a guild. It's like a family of players. And this is something I wish I knew more about before starting Final Fantasy XIV, was just the power that an FC has, because an FC can truly make or break your experience with this game. I spent most of my A Realm Reborn days alone, often getting requests to join an FC and often declining, in part because I didn't know how to accept the invite, but also because I didn't know their value as a new player. Luckily, this ignorance didn't last long, as I was quickly picked up by a female Aura, thrust into an FC, and invited to a Discord channel that truly enhanced the Final Fantasy XIV experience. I got daily greetings, had plenty of people to run content with, and had all the resources a new player could ask for when I was unsure about different parts of the game. Not to mention so many minion gifts. And actually, leaving Oceania was super hard because of the bonds I made with my Aussie friends. Granted, not every FC is as sparkly as I mentioned. An FC can make or break your experience. I've read plenty of stories online about FC drama and have even heard stories from people I've met in the game. Some people even leaving the game entirely due to the drama, which is very unfortunate. So if you're a new player watching this, be cautious when choosing an FC. It can truly shape your Final Fantasy XIV experience. Next tip for new players is don't be scared to try all the class roles. Now, I'm a victim to my own anxieties, and as a result, I refused to play healer for the longest time, as well as tank, meaning I missed out on a ton of great content. My safe place was DPS. Again, this is in part because I was new to the genre entirely, but also the responsibility of tank and healer just felt more significant to clearing that I didn't want that level of responsibility. I just wanted to poke things with my Dragoon Spear. Naturally, I was drawn to the healing role out of curiosity, but was far too nervous to take on that role. Eventually, I did try White Mage, and the pure adrenaline was insane, as I was spamming healing spells while running through Sastasha. Getting that first clear as a White Mage, especially after avoiding the role for so long, was pure bliss. Granted, it has taken me a lot of work to even be considered mediocre in that role, but I've found largely that the Final Fantasy XIV community is rather forgiving. So I would encourage new players to absolutely try all the new roles that you're interested in, and don't worry about failing. It's inevitable. I've come to the understanding that as a party, it is very important to wipe because it only makes you stronger and gives everyone something to laugh at when you do eventually clear. My next tip for new players is take your freaking time with the MSQ. This item, in my opinion, is one of the most important tips I can give new players. Take your freaking time. Read and absorb all the conversations, get familiar with player names, read your journal. You only get to experience this master level story once, and I wish I could adjust how I navigated A Realm Reborn. Now, I started this game really intentional about reading all the dialogue, speaking to NPCs, and trying to understand the overworld better, but right around the 3/4 mark of the base game, I began skimming and at times even regrettably skipping through dialogue. This was in part my fault for trying to blaze through the MSQ quickly, and the temptation to skip dialogue and run through the quest as fast as I could was very pressing. There were a few moments where I was scratching my head asking myself, who is this again, or why is that important? And I'm kind of kicking myself looking back, which is exactly why in Heavensward I am slowing down, I'm absorbing everything, taking note of all the details, so that I can truly be whacked in the face by whatever emotional arc lies waiting for me at the end. So if you're a new player, take your freaking time, enjoy it. It is going to be a joyride. The very last tip I have for new players for Final Fantasy XIV is play when and how you want. This tip truly came out of months of playing the game almost every single day. It's important to remember this game isn't going anywhere, and whatever content is happening, it'll likely be here when you get back. The only exception is seasonal events, which can be super special, but other than that, feel free to take a break from the game or even change your playstyle, learn a new job, go to an RP server, go night clubbing, hunt down the perfect glam combo. The most important part of this game is that you enjoy it, and at the time and speed you prefer, so don't let anyone tell you otherwise, and don't let the FOMO keep you bound up like it did me. I would sometimes log in after work too tired to even play, but felt obligated to log in since I'm paying for a subscription. Sometimes I would just sit and log in and just stare at Limsa, but that pressure was self-imposed and honestly super unnecessary. So if you're a new player, give yourself the permission to take a break or even change how you play or what you're playing content-wise. And that concludes my top 10 things I wish I knew as a new player. I hope you enjoyed the video, hope it gave you a good laugh, and as always, consider subbing to the channel. Thank you to my supporters and my Patreon supporters. Until next time, stay nerdy, and bye-bye.